Welcome back to Learn from the Pros. In this video we are going to observe a game by Jon Ludwig Hammer, who was the 10th player at the first event of the Grand Chess Tour, the Norway Chess Super Tournament. This is a game he played against his former trainer Agdenstein in 2015, and you can see that the king of Agdenstein is on e2. And that's not because he didn't castle. He castled kingside, but Jon Ludwig built up such a strong attack on the kingside, on the semi-open g5, doubling his rooks, bringing all the other pieces towards the kingside. So White decided that it was time to flee from this flank and find shelter somewhere else. Right now it seems that the king is okay on e2 because you can't break through in the center. This pawn is blocked, all the others are blocked as well. The structure is fixed and there's no sacrifice. We cannot really capture on g3 with the knight. It's all defended, everything protected. So how can Black continue his attack? Well, if you cannot do anything else on the king's side and you cannot break through in the center, you can still try to open files on the other flank. And now, if you look at the queen side, you realize that there are no pieces on the queen side. All the white and black pieces are on the king side or in the center, but not on the queen side. So if Black manages to open the queen side, that will mean a big trouble for White because he would need defending pieces there and he doesn't have. So let's open the queen side. How can we open it as quickly as possible? Well, by sacrificing a pawn, b5, very strong move, and after c takes b5, a6. Doesn't matter that we have to give up a pawn or two, the point is to open the queen side as quickly as possible so White doesn't have enough time to bring his pieces and defend the king. Now if b takes a6, Black will simply capture, attack the a pawn, and after a4 there could come another pawn sacrifice just to open the bishop's diagonal and open the b5. So this would be a position where the black rooks can come very quickly to the queen side. The a4 pawn is hanging, the bishop is very well placed, and there are no defending pieces on the queen side. I would definitely not want to play this position with White, and that's probably the reason why Agdenstein decided to play b6 here, trying to keep the position as close as possible, but he will not manage. After queen takes b6, king d1, trying to bring the queen to the queen side and march with the king somewhere safer. There could have been a very strong move already that Hammer did not play. He played a5. The idea is very good. He wants to open even more files. He wants to open the b5, so he's threatening a4, and after that queen b1 check. But he could have played already a move that we saw. This idea we saw in another line, c4, to open the bishop's diagonal. The pawn cannot be taken with the b pawn because then there's this check on b1 and White's king is in trouble. He has to try to keep the b file open, the b file closed, not open, by capturing on c4 with the d pawn. But in that case, bishop b4 once again, and after rook e2, d3, and the knight jumps to d4. This position is just extremely powerful. All the black pieces are active. Look at the rooks, the knight in the center, the bishop, the queen, and this d3 pawn is so annoying too, covering a lot of squares where White cannot move any pieces. So this is a position where White is a pawn up, but he is lost and he doesn't have any counterplay. He will simply have to try to defend somehow, but it's not an easy task at all. Therefore, c4 would have been a very strong move in this position. Hammer played a5, which, as I told you, the idea is very good, but it's slower. And if you want to attack and keep the initiative going, you have to act as quickly as possible. So it doesn't matter that c4 would have been a pawn sacrifice. It was a pawn sacrifice that was really worth it. After a5, White tried to create counterattack by playing g4. This move opens the diagonal for the queen, so now he attacks the e5 pawn, but it is a pawn sacrifice also, because now this h4 pawn can be captured. Of course, Agdenstein didn't blunder the pawn, he sacrificed it on purpose because he thinks that after knight d2, protecting the f3 pawn. Now he is threatening this capture on e5, and also when the knight jumps away from h4, the h5 pawn will be hanging. And imagine the queen appearing on h5. Suddenly, even the black king could be in trouble if white manages to double or triple his heavy pieces on the h file. So that was the idea of this g4 move by Agdenstein. And here Hammer played queen e6, a very human move protecting the pawn, but once again there was something more powerful. It's not easy to play this position, so I'm not saying that Hammer didn't play well. He played many good moves, and that's why I'm showing this game, because it's a very good game. But of course the computer is always smarter than us, and he simply says that we don't need to defend this pawn. He could have played, instead of queen e6, a4, just continuing the idea, this breakthrough on the queen side, giving up the e5 pawn. And after a takes b3, a takes, it doesn't seem like we achieved much, because even if black comes to the a file, the king will go back to e2. But the point of all this is that knight g6, this knight is heading to f4. So in a position like this, we are threatening to attack from the queen side, and the king cannot go back to e2 either because of the knight jump to f4. That's such a hole in white's position, this f4 square. It's an extremely powerful spot for black's knight, and this is a position where white's king cannot hide anywhere. So there was no need to defend this pawn on e5. He could have played a4, but let's see what happened in the game. Queen e6. Now knight takes c5. This is a piece sacrifice, a temporary piece sacrifice, because after bishop takes c5, which was played in the game, rook takes e5, now black will not be able to keep all the minor pieces protected. He will either have to give up the bishop or the knight. After bishop takes c5, of course, this knight is already hanging, but this move, rook takes e5, is the best. We capture the pawn first, and then we will capture either the bishop or the knight. The problem with knight takes c5 is that it wasn't necessary to capture this knight. Black could have played queen c6. This was the strongest move. Now the knight is hanging and the f3 pawn is hanging. So if he goes back with the knight to protect it, then rook c8, threatening with some annoying checks on the c file. And if the king goes back, then once again, you already know this, the f4 square is so weak. It is a perfect outpost for black's knight, after which, if the knight arrives at the f4, the d3 pawn will be hanging, and simply white's king has no shelter. And that's why this knight takes c5 wasn't a good move, neither bishop takes c5, but it's such a complicated game that it's normal that the players don't make the very best moves. Still, it's such an exciting game, and you will see that after queen f6, suddenly it is white who could have taken the advantage. He could have played rook takes h5. This is what I was telling you before, that if white could bring all his pieces to the h file, then even black's king can be in trouble. It's such a sharp position where both players are attacking. So now, for instance, bishop e7 to protect this knight, because he couldn't jump away. It would have been mate on h7 if the knight moves. But now g5, and this knight will be captured anyway. So white wins the piece back, and now it's him who is attacking. But after queen f6, Agdenstein played rook takes c5, knight takes f3 is what happened in the game. And here another mistake came from white, which was playing knight e4. He could have taken this pawn on h5, but this is a position that would have been the best situation for white. You can understand that this is not something that anybody would enter easily. The white king is very exposed, but the problem is that black cannot bring his rooks to the attack because he has to take care of his own king as well. So this is a position that, according to the engine, is a 0-0-0, completely draw. Well, for humans sometimes it's not that easy, and perhaps he thought that he would have better chances with knight e4. This knight is really nice on e4, but what he missed is that after queen a6, his queen is still hanging, and now the d3 pawn is hanging too. He has to protect it with the queen, and after h takes g4, it's not just a pawn up for black, but it's a very important pawn up. This pawn on g4 is a passed pawn, and it protects the f3 knight. The f3 knight is a beast. It covers so many squares. The white king cannot go to d2, he cannot go to e1, the queen cannot go back to h2 to attack on the h file. So it is a very strong piece, and it's thanks to this g4 pawn that is supporting now the knight. Here rook c h5 was played, but now black will simply bring his rooks to the c file. That's where he can attack white's king. So after rook h6, he played rook g c7. It doesn't matter that his queen is hanging because he's threatening mating 1 by rook c1. After knight c5, this is a tricky move, because if we capture it, saying that okay, we capture the knight, and you still cannot capture our queen because rook c1 is a mate. Yeah, but careful, you should pay attention to the opponent's threats. If you move the rook away from the 7th rank, then rook takes h7 will come, and it is white who will give mate, not black. So careful. After knight c5, the good move is what Hammer played, a very nice queen sacrifice. Queen takes h6, rook takes h6, and now rook takes c5. There's no more rook takes h7, there's no other rook on the board, so the threat is the same, mating 1. Black has a rook and a knight for the queen, plus this g4 pawn, but it compensates, and it is worth more than the queen, because white cannot avoid the mate or losing the game in another way. Let's see why. If he plays queen b2, which protects the c1 square, black can still play rook c1 check, and after this exchange, it seems like white took 2 rooks for the queen, so he's an exchange up, but g3, g2, g1 cannot be prevented. He cannot play rook g6, so if he comes back with the rook simply, then g2, and he will have to give up his rook for this passed pawn. So after rook takes c5, this is not an option, and he cannot play moves like queen e4, because then it's a mating 2. What he did was sacrificing his rook on h7 to have a few checks at least with the queen, but after queen e4, king h8, there are no more checks. You can see how strong this knight is on f3. It protects this d4 pawn where white could give a check. Also, the rook is protecting the 5th rank, so black's pieces are attacking and defending at the same time, protecting the black king. Even though it is exposed, there are no pawns around black's king, there are no checks in this position. Queen takes g4 was what Eggenstein played, but after a few checks, a few very accurate moves, rook c1, king e2, now knight g1 check. Of course, Hammer calculated this all until the end, king f2, and now rook f8 check. The white king will have to go to the g file where the queen is lost, so Eggenstein resigned. I really like this game because even though it has mistakes, very human mistakes, the idea of opening the queen side with those pawn sacrifices was just a very nice, a very instructive way of playing chess. So if you don't know where to break through, if you feel like your king has that the opponent's king has found shelter in the middle of the board or on the other flank, just look for a way to open the position on a flank where you would not expect it. There were no pieces on the queen side, and yet if you manage to open the position on the other flank and bring your pieces quickly to that flank, then you have a very big advantage because the opponent's pieces are still on the other flank. In this case, they were all on the king side and all the action was happening on the queen side. Hope you like this game, and I will see you in another clip. Bye bye.